Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Total Football Analysis EPL podcast. We are the Thinking Fans podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties who are current pro players, real coaches, academics, and stat heads. Today, we're joined by soccer analyst Harshal Patel, and on the pod is professional footballer Dre Fortune, and I'm host Chris Mumford. Bella ciao. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, a 300-page guide of the season created by a team of 15 writers and designers. Moneyball for football, analytics plus opposition analysis plus eye candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. During Matchday 12 and 13, the games felt a little stale in that we had 8 draws. For the matches that had a winner, 5 of those 12 were won by underdogs. Curious. Today, we're going to talk about emerging trends as well as the big 5 teams, as well as others, as the games are coming thick and fast. So, Harshal, let's start at the top, the Liverpool. And we can't really talk about Liverpool now without first diving into the Liverpool-Tottenham match. Help us, give us your rendition of what happened in that game.
First of all, I'd just like to sort of, point out that this was almost the perfect Mourinho masterclass, quote unquote, that we've been accustomed to seeing over the years, or rather what people associate Mourinho with, right? Where he goes away to a big club, sits back, soaks up pressure and hits them on the counter and wins the game. That's essentially how Spurs scored the first goal in this match, where I thought Lo Celso's pass to Son was fantastic after winning the ball back not high, deep in their own half, but with Liverpool committed up front. So then Son was able to race through, and I thought he finished superbly. There are very few players who can make Alisson look like a very ordinary keeper in one-on-ones, and I think Son is one of the few who did that. But if you look at the game overall, I don't think Mourinho's point after the game that Spurs were the better team was sort of, it made sense, because yes, Liverpool did have possession, a lot of possession, but they didn't really create any chances. Most of the shots that they took in the first half were from outside the box and straight at Hugo Lloris. The 2 goals they scored, one of them was a huge deflection. The other was from a set piece. Spurs, on the other hand, had 3 clear-cut chances in the second half where I feel they should have scored. Bergwijn hit the post. Almost, I think, it was 3 or 4 minutes into the second half, after Reece Williams made a mistake and sort of put him through on goal. He should have scored, but what's his name? Alisson made the save, so it went out for a corner. And from that corner, Harry Kane then had an unmarked header, which I don't know how he missed the goal from there. So I think Spurs actually, this was the perfect sort of template for how Mourinho wants Spurs to play. Yes, Liverpool did win the game, which is a huge boost in terms of their ambitions for retaining the title, because they went 3 points ahead of Spurs. The 2 teams were level on points before this game. But I think that if you want to actually look at Spurs and point out an issue with them, it's the previous week, the game against Crystal Palace, where there were a few issues with how they played, and we can go into that later. But with regard to Liverpool, I think obviously Klopp will take the 3 points, but I don't think even though he said publicly that he was happy, I don't think he should be too happy with that, because they didn't really create too much.
So I'm going to take a different view on this. My lens on this is that I believe Liverpool have 8 senior members of their playing squad out. They had to start 2 19-year-old kids, one of which wasn't even playing in 4th division last year, right? And they stuck it to Tottenham. And yes, Tottenham had a higher XGA than Liverpool did, but Liverpool, the thing is, you keep pounding away and pounding away. And I will tell you, as a goalkeeper, I hated giving credit for deflections. But the truth is, someone's got to take a shot towards the goal. Someone's got to get open. and some things have to happen. And unfortunately, soccer is a outcome focused business. So I think to celebrate Tottenham, okay, so y'all almost beat a team that's missing 8 of its senior members. If Tottenham were missing 8 of their senior folks, how would the outcome of the game have been against a full strength Liverpool? What do you think the outcome would be? So this was Tottenham's time to, frankly, steal one, and they didn't. And that could have gone either way, but you only get 2 chances a season, right? And later, we'll get into this later. I don't worry about Tottenham being able to bring it to better opponents who are going to play wide open, but I don't think they're going to be able to take care of business against teams that are going to be on the low block. You can't be both wide open, expansive, and a counterattacking. I just, unfortunately, that's really hard to do. Dre, what's your take on this?
Well, first to speak on the injuries bit, I disagree, because I challenge you to think about, with the starting 11 that Liverpool started yesterday, there's probably 2 changes if Klopp has his full 11. It's Van Dijk, and I imagine Fabinho will probably start in the middle with Henderson and Wijnaldum. He'll probably bring in, Matip or something like another center back. As far as everything else goes, he's got his front 3, he's got his fullbacks, his goalkeeper, most of his midfield. So I don't really think that the injuries is a huge argument from that perspective. And then secondly, I mean, I agree with Harshal and I agree with Mourinho, because if we look at football from a perspective of, we all like to watch pretty football and passes and creating chances and whatnot, then we'll disagree. But Mourinho sets his team out to play a specific way, and I think that for a majority of the game they did that, and they had the opportunities to beat Liverpool on the counter, and they didn't score. Liverpool really didn't create much. They scored from a deflection, like you mentioned, and a set piece towards the end of the game, which Spurs has been struggling with recently. So I don't know that they outperformed Tottenham on the day. So okay. That's just my take on it.
Let me push back on this. Van Dijk, Gomez, Jota, Alcantara, those four folks, which would probably be on most starting teams of the super clubs, right? That is a very different Liverpool than what was on the pitch.
They wouldn't all start though.
I think they would.
You think so?
I think so. I think
all 4 of them.
I think that Klopp is thinking, hey, this guy Jota's, he's got some young legs in him. He started him. He's experimented with them before, having the 4 of them. And you think about the crazy creativity, particularly when you have Curtis Jones come in there, right? And, Henderson gives you that strong spine you need. It gives Wijnaldum an opportunity to play. Now I can understand why they haven't been as aggressive about re-signing Wijnaldum, because they see that Curtis Jones is another option for them. So that's one thing, is I think those 4 players make Liverpool much better than the team that was out there. Secondly, I'm not saying that a counterattack versus an expansive, what's better, what's worse. I'm saying that Liverpool is still the much better squad than Tottenham is. Could Tottenham beat them on any given day? Heck yeah, right? That's the nature of soccer. But what I'm saying is that I categorically Mourinho thinks that the best team lost. Okay, I agree with him in that Liverpool did not have its 4 best players. Maybe you could make a case, but you still got to look at the box score. It is what it is. So I'm not trying to have a philosophical debate about expansive versus counterattack. I'm talking about Liverpool versus Tottenham. Harshal, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I already made my point earlier on that it's a results business, football. And I mean, more than a results business, it's a low scoring game, right? So I get the fact that you ideally want to create as many chances as possible because it's a low scoring game. So you want to maximize your opportunities to score and all of that. But Mourinho's done this many times. He's a master at deflection as well, to be honest, because now, I mean, look at us. Even we are talking about how he came out after the game and said that the best team lost, rather than maybe focusing on Spurs. And it's actually, I think that the fact that he said that after the game, and he's choosing to do this sort of or try to play up on this narrative in the media. I think he personally believes that Spurs have a chance in the title, which is why he wants to deflect as much pressure as possible, put as much pressure on Klopp, for example, because pre-match, before the game, I think a reporter asked him about, as you said, as Dre mentioned, and both of you have spoken about Liverpool's injuries. Yeah, Mourinho actually almost it was almost what Dre said, that where are the injuries? I mean, yes, they've lost Van Dijk, but then look at all the others. They have everybody else. They have Salah, Mane, Firmino, Alisson. He rattled off all the names there, and look at their side. So it's not like they don't have the quality in depth, which is what I mean. To be honest, that's what came through in this game, because we spoke. You just mentioned Curtis Jones. I thought he was fantastic in this game. It really looked like a coming of age performance where he sort of announced himself. He's been in the squad for a while. He's been talked about as one of the one of the best prospects out of the Liverpool academy in a long time. But I think he completely put his stamp on this game, and he's just 19, and he sort of bossed the midfield. I mean, if you look at the stats as well, he made 105 successful passes, which is the highest of anybody on the pitch in that game. He made 81 of those passes in the Spurs half. Spurs as a team made 57 successful passes in Liverpool's half. And Jones has made 81 successful passes of his own in Spurs half, which just tells you that just one side of the story, which tells you how. But even when you looked at him, he was popping up on either flank to support whichever flank Liverpool were attacking down. There were a couple of supremely skillful moments. I remember there was a drag back and sort of pass out to evade a Spurs press, which was really good. But yeah, I thought he was absolutely fantastic, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he's capped by England in March, and he could be a surprise pick in the squad for the Euros if he keeps up this form.
So, Dre, from a player perspective, I mean, he adds an element of creativity to Liverpool that, frankly, maybe takes a little pressure off of TAA and Robertson. What's your take on what he does that's especially effective?
Well, honestly, I think it's a lot to do with just popping up in the right spaces. I think he pops up in the right spaces at the right times, and his decision making is really good. And obviously, he has the technical ability to support the ideas that he has, and they come through really well. And when you have a front three like he has to work with, it makes it all that much easier as well. So I think he's been superb for Liverpool, and he had a really good performance.
So one thing that's been brought up is how Klopp has been arguing for 5 substitutions and frankly hasn't used many of them. Now against Tottenham, I could easily see, because I imagine he wants to win that head-to-head game, right? The next few games are going to be against Crystal Palace, West Brom, Newcastle, and then Southampton. There's going to be a little bit of work on January 4th, and Aston Villa and then Man U. So he may have a week and a half or so to maybe get some rotations in. Any thoughts about that, Harshal?
Yeah, it's a little disingenuous, I think, on his part, because he's been very vocal to the extent of attacking the broadcasters about kickoff times and all of that, and not being given enough time to recover. And added to that, the fact that the Premier League, which incidentally voted for a third time, I believe, to not allow 5 subs just a couple of days ago again. So it's and that then again points to the fact that the managers apparently want 5 subs, but the guys in the Premier League meetings are the CEOs and the chairman and all of them who are sort of voting against this. So I don't know what's happening on that front, but it's a little disingenuous on his part, because I think Liverpool have made 1 substitution out of 6 available in the last 2 Premier League games. So if it is about, and I get the fact that both those games he was actually chasing a result. The last on the Saturday, they were drawing against Fulham. They were actually losing to Fulham, and then they managed to get a penalty, and Salah scored from that, so they equalized. But they were still obviously chasing a winner, so he didn't make changes there. Here as well, it was a draw. They scored in the 90th minute, so he was chasing a win at that point. I get the fact that you're looking for a win, so you're trying to keep the same team, or you might not have the quality on the bench at the moment due to injuries. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, Naby Keita was on the bench, for example. He's someone who can do a brilliant job in midfield. That's just one example, but it's not like Liverpool don't have options. But I do expect maybe if he does manage to get a couple of players back now, I expect Thiago to be able to feature, for example, over maybe the next 3-4 games to some capacity. So I would hope to see some rotation. I mean, there will need to be some rotation because the schedule is such, especially over the festive period in England, where you play literally every 2 or 3 days. So
Yeah.
let's see how he goes.
Klopp was joking that they'd really like to sign Alcantara for the January transfer window because he hasn't been able to play. So, Dre, let's turn our attention to Tottenham, who are number 2 on the table, and I think we would all agree that on any given day, Tottenham can beat a Liverpool or a Man City, right? They are basically Atletico Madrid North for the Premier League. But how hard is it? Because Tottenham's going to be playing Leicester this weekend, and then they've got Wolves. And I think those are going to be really tough teams, kind of low block sort of teams for them to go up against, even though Leicester has been playing more expansive. And I don't know which Leicester is going to show up on the weekend. But how hard is it for a team to adjust to playing one style, which is expansive, and then being able to go to a low block and vice versa?
Yeah, it'll definitely be a little bit different for them. I think Mourinho's finally really stamped his ideals onto the team, as we've seen, and they've been so potent on the counterattack with Kane and Son. I'm not sure how it's going to go. I'm interested to see how they play against teams who defend a little bit deeper against them, because I mean, we've seen that they have the quality of players to be able to break it down, but obviously they haven't been doing that as much recently. Mm-hmm. And having to kind of flip that switch is going to be a little bit difficult, I think, especially in the beginning. But I mean, their pros are good enough, so I'm sure they'll figure it out as the game progresses.
So I know the teams you've historically played on as a professional have been more expansive in nature. How mm-hmm. hard is it for y'all to, and just you as a player, for you to just shift to a more defensive, more of a lockdown? Is that hard, or is that just you've been doing it enough years where it's not as hard as you think?
So the understanding of where you need to be and you know, kind of how you have to play is always there. You kind of know what you need to do. I think one thing, at least for me personally, is it's a little bit more frustrating to kind of have to shift to that style, just because of how I like to play and whatnot. Like, you don't want to do that necessarily. You kind of go out and you want to play the same way every single time and just kind of have that level of comfort and whatnot. But I think, you know, the understanding of what you need to do tactically and all that is always going to be there. They'll go over it. They'll understand the different movements and positions they need to take up on the pitch and all that. That'll all be pretty easily done.
I gotcha. Harshal, any other notes on Tottenham?
Yeah, it's basically what you said, where it's the big games or the games where they can sit back and attack against the likes of City, Liverpool. They've already done well in those games. You know, they did beat City, but it's the games against teams where the other team is the one that's sitting back, which they could struggle with. And that's basically what happened in the Crystal Palace game, although that's not exactly what happened. They actually started out of the blocks really fast. They were peppering Vicente Guaita in goal. But the moment they took the lead, Mourinho sat back. The Spurs went 1-0 up against Palace, and instead of asserting their dominance and sort of, you know, taking a 2-goal lead, which would sort of have killed the game off, they sat back, and that shot them in the foot, because Palace were able to equalize with, I think, about 10 minutes to go. And then again, Spurs threw the kitchen sink at Guaita, and he made three, I think I can remember 3 or 4 brilliant saves in just those last 10 minutes to deny them that the win, which, yes, Spurs should have won the game, but I think they could have easily won the game in the first half, I guess, had they, you know, pushed on and got that second goal. So that's the thing with Mourinho, where he maybe, I mean, he's not going to do it because that's not how he works, but it might just work to his favor if he pushes on against those teams, you know, in mid-table and lower, and scores maybe 2 or 3 goals early on, so that he can then sit back rather than scoring one goal and sitting back, because you're always, I mean, a one goal lead is nothing in football. You know, it can easily be overturned at any point. So that did happen to Spurs at the weekend. So I am interested to see. They do have a couple of those sort of games coming up. They play Wolves, they play Fulham in the next couple of games. So let's see how they adapt to that. And also, to be honest, I mean, Son is on an absolutely spectacular level of finishing right now. I don't know if he's going to be able to maintain that throughout the course of the season. Although, again, the counterpoint to that is the fact that if you look at stats, Son has scored 60 goals in the Premier League since his second season, since the start of his second season in England. His expected goal tally over that time is, I think, 34. So, I mean, he scored 60 goals from an XG of 34. So, I mean, that tells you that he probably can keep this going for the rest of the season. So let's see if that works out. Because that double act of Kane dropping deep and acting as a supplier and Son running through and scoring has worked brilliantly so far for them.
Well, and the regression to the mean, hopefully that means Bergwijn's going to go on a tear pretty soon, because he's been
because
on that. And I will tell you, shout out to Holberg, who's just fit in. I think Tottenham's transfer business, 12, 13 matches in was absolutely brilliant. So it will, Leicester City with Ndidi coming back, right? And it depends on how match fit he's going to be. Wolves are just always Wolves. I think Fulham and Leeds are going to be better suited for them to just kind of sit back and hit the counters. So time will tell on that. So when I talk about the big six, I'm going to have to bring up Southampton, because there's a team in red that isn't in that top six anymore, to Dre's chagrin. But let's talk a little bit about Southampton. Is this a team we're going to be talking about in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks? Dre, what's your first take on Southampton?
I think they've had a remarkable start to the season. To answer your question directly, I don't think it will be. I think that they're going to probably fall off a little bit, especially through this little time period here where depth becomes incredibly important in the Premier League. But no, I think they've started off really well. They're playing really attractive football at the moment, and they found a way to get the results that they need.
Yeah, I tell you, I worry. They've got Man City, then they've got Fulham, and then they have West Hampton, and then they have Liverpool. So they've got, and then they've got Leicester. So, 2 tough weeks separated by 2 maybe weeks that they could do well on. What should we pay attention to, Harshal, with Southampton?
First of all, I think the concerns around rotation are justified, because Hasenhüttl has a very fixed starting 11, because he obviously has a very fixed system as well, the 4-2-2-2 that they play. It's well defined. All the players know their roles, and he's rarely deviated from it since the time he sort of brought that system in. And they have very specific players in terms of I don't think they've really changed their 11 too much, barring injuries, and that could be a problem, because they don't really have too much depth, to be honest. Especially, for example, they don't have a left back other than Ryan Bertrand, and that's something they're going to try and address in the January window. And when he was out for a couple of games, they had to make do with a centre back playing at left back and all of that. But apart from that, I think they're actually doing quite well, and like a couple of metrics sort of bear that out as well. I mean, if you look at shots conceded per 90 for the season so far, Southampton are fifth, have the fifth lowest shots conceded of all teams so far per on a 90-minute basis, which tells you that their defensive work has been really strong. And one player I've been really impressed by so far is Shea Adams. So he's obviously part of the strike duo with Danny Ings, and when Ings has been out, it's been Theo Walcott who's been playing. And to be honest, even Walcott has been supremely impressive. Walcott was brought in just as a backup, but he's taken his chance, while he's on loan from Everton. He's taken his chance, and he's actually in the first choice 11 right now. He's scoring, he's assisting, and he looks like he's fit into the Southampton system really well. But with regard to Shea Adams, he's playing a lot like Harry Kane at the moment, because he's the one who drops deep from off the two strikers. He's the one who'll drop deeper, link up with the midfielders, and put passes in for either the wide attacking midfielders or his strike partner. And he's actually got a bunch of goals and assists this season. I don't have the actual numbers on hand at the moment, but he's playing a very specific role really well, and he's making that Southampton team work in attack. So he's the one player I am going to be keeping an eye out over the next few games for Southampton.
And my sense is that Southampton's fate is going to go along with how Ings does. I think Shea has been such a pleasant surprise, particularly when Ings was out for a bit. I do want to give a shout out to Walker Peters and Bednarik, who, Walker Peters has got a 12.54 successful defensive actions per 90, and Bednarik has got 10.75. And I don't know if there are any other folks that jump out at the lineup for you to keep on, but Hasenhüttl's got them playing in a system where everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And I think it's enjoyable football to watch. I also think that their set pieces, they've got some height. So there's always going to be some threats on those. So they've got a couple of pieces in place. I just don't know if being third is going to be sustainable for them, especially given the tests that they're going to have coming up. So
just a couple of things to add on that, Chris. Since you mentioned Bednarik, Yannick Vestergaard, who's been at the back, Bednarik's partner, I think he's been fantastic. Obviously, he's 6'6", so he's great at defending the box and even attacking the box. I think he scored 3 goals already from corners. So that part of the game, yes, he's brilliant at, but he's been superb at bringing the ball out of the back and starting Southampton's attacks, in terms of build-up. And obviously, you've got the captain, James Ward-Prowse. I've spoken about it on the podcast a couple of times already. He's the best set-piece taker in the Premier League I've seen since David Beckham. The whip and the power and the accuracy he gets on his set pieces is brilliant. Both free kicks, obviously, he scored 2 or 3 brilliant free kicks already, and from corners and sort of indirect free kicks as well, where he puts the ball into such dangerous areas, and the trajectory of the ball is such that it's extremely difficult to defend, and that's why Southampton are actually doing well from set pieces, because the delivery from James Ward-Prowse is so good. So yes, I think third is obviously a little too high for them, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be in the conversation for the Europa League spot towards the end of the season.
Interesting. Trey, how about Leicester? They've been a bit inconsistent in the last few matches, right? They lost against Everton 2-0. Before that, they just cruised through Brighton. And they had a fairly pedestrian win over Sheffield United 2-1. They're going to have to play Tottenham and Man U as their next 2 matches. Ndidi is coming back. What are things you really like about their game?
Well, I think they have an established system and style of play, and obviously they're led by Vardy up front. It's interesting with Leicester, because I've always felt as though since they got into Europe, they would have a struggle with the balance between, having a little bit of success there and success in the league at the same time. They've seemed to figure it out a little bit. Obviously, they've made it out their group in Europa, and they're in the top four, right? Yeah, top 4 in the Premier League. So I'm liking what they're doing so far. The test coming up, like you mentioned, they've got Man U, they've got Tottenham. I'd even add Palace to the list. I think Palace have been coming along a little bit recently with the half back and whatnot. And it'll be interesting to see how they match up against those top teams. They tend to do pretty well, but like you said, they're pretty inconsistent, losing 3 of their last 5. So we'll see how that goes.
Harshal?
Yeah, Leicester, as you said, have been supremely inconsistent. I mean, if you look at their form, they're the team with the highest number of away wins in the league so far this season. But Sheffield United are the only team who've lost more home games, which, I mean, it's a very strange dichotomy, right? Like, where if you're a good team, you should ideally be doing well at home and away. But I mean, I would expect your home form to be supremely good. But look, I mean, they've already lost
Man U.
more home
Man U.
league games than they did. I did say that if you're expected to be a good team, and the jury is out on whether Man United are a good team at the moment. But yeah, so it's quite similar to how United are at the moment as well, where home form is a bit of a concern, but they're doing brilliantly well away. So Leicester, I think they're struggling against teams which don't give them space in behind, which is what Everton did brilliantly. They shut off any space for Vardy to run into, and they took advantage Everton took advantage and were able to counterattack and score goals and score the 2 goals that they did. So it's one of those where, again, I'm not saying injuries are a mitigation, but they've had a horrible injury list as well. They've I think at one point all of their first choice defenders were injured. Some of them are back now, but not, obviously they're still missing some very key players at the back. And Vardy, of course, isn't getting any younger, but he is still scoring the goals. So I'm actually, I don't know what will happen if Vardy gets injured, for example, because they do have creative talent all around him, but they don't really have the guy to put it in the net other than Vardy. So yes, it is inconsistent. And although I will give credit to Brendan Rodgers in terms of the fact that with the defensive injuries he's managed to put out a system with the back three that he's been playing, where he still managed to get results and keep a couple of clean sheets and all of that as well. So they do have some very good players. So even last season we saw the same thing, right? It was the same conversation around, are Leicester good enough to be in the top 4 and all of that. They did eventually fall out, but on the last day. So I expect them to be in the conversation for the top 4 again, because this season is extremely inconsistent, is going to be messy, and any team which puts together a decent run has a chance of being towards the top end of the table. So Leicester will be there and thereabouts, but yeah, they need their key players to be fit for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think my sense is that they're in for a final 4, top 4 finish, or maybe Europa. I mean, to me, the key checks or check boxes are great keeper, great striker, right? Solid defense, and that was a big question mark. But Fofana at 12.63 successful defensive actions per 90, as well as who would imagine Fuchs would still be around, but he's got 11.51. You know, his wife and family live in New York. He wants to move there, but Brendan Rodgers is making it so tough because he keeps giving him starts. So talk about, I'm hoping that Dre's career is such where the manager begs him to stay 1 or 2 years past and just keep playing. But to me, I mean, I think that Vardy scoring the way he does is mercurial in nature and therefore not consistent. To me, the real questions is going to end up being their creativity. And, you know, I think that Barnes started out pretty hot, has cooled off. Madison's had some injury issues and is coming back. So I think if you can kind of get the engine room going there, they might be able to do better against those lower ranked teams, but they're always going to be able to bring it against teams that are going to give them space in the back, which tend to be higher up in the league tables. So we'll see.
That's actually, again, Chris, sorry to interrupt, but that's actually a good point you bring up about the creativity, because if you look at XG, if you look at expected goals, specifically non-penalty expected goals. So if you remove penalties from the equation, because penalties usually are given an XG value of, most models have them at around 0.75 or 0.76, because that's the historical rate at which penalties have been scored. 3 out of 4 penalties historically are scored. So that's the XG value that's given to a penalty. Leicester have had 8 penalties in the league so far, which is double the next best. So clearly the highest number in the league. If you remove penalties and you look at Leicester's XG, they are, I believe, 6th lowest in the league. They have a non-penalty XG of just 15.16. So yes, there is definitely a creative problem or a creativity issue, which is a little bit surprising for me, because they have James Maddison, although again he's been injured for quite a bit. He's only just come back over the last 2 or 3 games. They have Yuri Tielemans, who's sort of dictates from deeper. The likes of Harvey Barnes, Shengi Zunda, who's been signed on loan. He was sort of getting substitute appearances and he's been starting the last couple of games. So they do have a bunch of good creative players, but it doesn't look like their output is being maximized, or that I think they can do better. Because again, even if you look at shots per 90 for Leicester have the 7th lowest shots per 90 in the league as well. So they've been extremely efficient. They've won penalties, obviously, but they've also been extremely efficient with their scoring, which is a hallmark of Jamie Vardy's career. He's, I think, the archetype of the efficient finisher. You know, he rarely needs more than 2, maybe 3 chances a game to score. So yes, that is a good thing, but it could come back to bite them, because as you said, if that lack of creativity could be an issue against teams which sit back, and then obviously they don't give you the space for Vardy to run in behind as well.
So let's talk about one of those teams that might just be visiting, and that would be Everton, who are currently in 5th place now with 23 points. Help us unpack that a little bit. Dre, what are your impressions of Everton?
I think they're a little bit inconsistent as well. I think on an earlier podcast I discussed, I expected them to probably slide down the table a little bit. And I thought that started happening about a month ago. They, lost to Newcastle, they lost to Man U, and then they came back and won a game, and then they lost to Leeds, and they lost to and then they tied Burnley. And then they came back again, and they've beaten Chelsea, and they beat Leicester. I think they beat Leicester quite comfortably, and they beat Chelsea, obviously. So I'm not really sure about Everton. They're kind of, fooling me a little bit. They keep going back and forth. And then, 3 of the next 4 games, they've got Arsenal, they've got Man U, they've got Man City. So I think those would be relatively challenging games for them. And I think coming out of there, we'll really see kind of what they're going to look like for the rest of the season based on how those results go for them. But I mean, again, they've started off really well, and this is kind of the Everton that I was used to, because growing up, Everton was always the top 6 team. They were, kind of 5th or 6th right there. So I think they're kind of finding that a little bit more, and it's nice to see.
Any quick notes, Harshal, on Everton?
They're another team who struggled with injuries. Luca Digne has been out. He's going to be out for a couple of months at least. And that left-hand combination that they've had with Richarlison and Luca Digne has been so instrumental to their play, not just this season, or the last couple of seasons, but that axis has sort of been broken up. They've not had Seamus Coleman, captain right back, as well. They've had a couple of injuries in midfield as well. So it's, again, I am not saying injuries are a mitigation, but the team balance has been thrown off a little bit, to the extent that they've been, I think, 3 or 4 games where they've not had any natural fullbacks at all. So Ancelotti has had to switch to a back 3, and he's playing midfielders. Alex Iwobi, for example, has been playing right wing back or left wing back. You've seen Fabian Delph play at left wing back, but even he got injured. So Ancelotti's really had to put square pegs in round holes and make do with what he has. But their summer business was really good. We've spoken about this earlier as well. They've literally bought in completely new midfield. But Allen and Abdoulaye Doucouré, and obviously James Rodriguez. So, and in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, they've got a guy who just can't stop scoring. Although yes, he hasn't scored in the last 2 games, but he has got a couple of assists in those last 2 games. And I think it's good for Everton that he's not scored and they've won those games. The games against Chelsea and who was it that they beat 2-0? Leicester, yeah. So the fact that Calvert-Lewin hasn't scored in those 2 games is a good thing, because it might just point towards the fact that other guys are ready to step up and score. So it's one of those where I think they'll be in the top 6, top 7, but if they get those injured players back, they could even push for a higher spot as well.
Yeah, I think Richarlison has been obviously very disappointing. I think James is good, not really, kind of living up to his reputation a bit. I will say that watching Iwobi really start to gain some form as of late has been nice to see that story progress. I mean, his successful attacking actions per 90 is almost 7, which is some of the best in the entire league. Now he hasn't scored any goals, but in terms of doing the yeoman's work and looking to create opportunities that may or may not be there. Nice to see that. Nice to see that. So, well, let's turn our attention to the numbers, the team in the 6th place, Manchester United. I don't know if there's much to say about this team here. Dre, any thoughts on Man U? What's your hot take on Man U right now?
Yeah, I'll get started before Harshal goes. But no, I see that they've started to pick up a little bit of form. They've had a few wins. I think they've won 4 of the last 5. But I will say I'm not too impressed yet, just because, I mean, obviously I watched the game against Sheffield United yesterday that people would think that they would win quite handily. And I think it was a little bit nervy at the end there. And they drew with Man City, which I don't think for them they're happy with that after being knocked out of Champions League. I think they were looking to bounce back and kind of get a result there. And then, they have four games in the next 9 days. They've got Leeds, Everton, Leicester, and Wolves, which I think are all going to be tough tests for them in terms of, where they want to move in the table. They're obviously looking to move up, and those 4 teams are going to be formidable, opponents in their way. So obviously they're playing really well right now. Pogba for me is the guy. I mean, I think he's got to play for them if they're looking to have success and move up the table. I think he's world class. I think without him they're going to struggle. But obviously, they have the differences at the moment, and unfortunately he could be going out the door in January. But other than that, we'll see what happens in the next 9 days with Man U.
So I think my take on Man U is, I think they're playing exactly the way they should be, right? I mean, they've got a transfer policy that has been driven by, many would say would be Woodward, who, is a soccer guy, but not a soccer guy. There's no clearly established system. Ole's got a super pragmatist style of play, depending on who they play against. And they've assembled all these really, really, really talented players, but the connectivity isn't there. And they tend to buy in places where they don't really need folks. And so you kind of would think a team like this would underperform. And the truth is, if their underperformance is 6th place with a game in hand, where they could easily be in 2nd or 3rd place once that game in hand is done, is that a bad story? I mean, what Man United is just getting hammered in the press and by fans. And I'm just like, the way the foundation's built, I think they're kind of doing as advertised. Harshal, what's your take on that?
That's exactly, I mean, I have to agree with that, in that I said this on a previous podcast as well, that United have actually been quite consistent. People say that United are inconsistent, and I have said that myself as well. But if you look at how they've been playing and what their results have been, they've actually been quite consistent. You know what you're going to get in terms of they're going to struggle maybe usually to break down deep lying defenses, but if you give them space to counterattack, they're going to punish you. And that's basically what they've been doing ever since Ole was put in charge a little more than 2 years ago. So yeah, and as you said, if the table is as it is and United win their game in hand, they'll be 2 points off first place. So some of the criticism I feel has been a little bit over the top, but some of it is justified as well. And that's the story with Man United. It's that they're not as bad as people say they are, but they obviously can be much better. And I agree with Dre in the fact that Pogba is absolutely world class, but I will say that Ole was finding a way to play without him. But now I think in the last couple of games, Pogba has shown that, you know what, you can't really do without me in the lineup. Because, I mean, look at the assist he puts on for Martial in the game against Sheffield United. That first time pass, perfectly weighted into Martial's feet for that second goal. He did. In the City game, I mean, I wouldn't really put too much on him in terms of creativity, but again, that I was happy with the City game in the sense that City didn't really create too much, and that was down both to City but also to United's defensive work. And yeah, I think that it's just about, if United can get a decent run of results going, and just stop making defensive errors, because against Sheffield United, they scored through a defensive error with Dean Henderson making a mistake. But also I think Harry Maguire was to blame as well, because I think he should have been positioned wider to give himself the space to then play the ball out as well. If you've seen the goal, whereas because he's so close to Dean Henderson, he's pressed easily and then he's forced back to pass. So those individual defensive errors that keep happening, that is a lot of it is down to Solskjaer as well, I feel, because that's been a theme over the last 12 months, individual defensive errors. So there has to be something he needs to do. He needs to coach them better, I feel. But yeah, if they can put a bit of maybe over the next 4-5 games, and I think they'll play the game in hand as well, maybe in the first or second week of January. So maybe say in about 2 or 3 weeks time, we might have a better picture of where United are. And if they've managed to win most of those games, they'll be second or third, I feel, which is a great position.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, yeah, I just want to speak on the criticism bit real quick. I mean, historically, Man U's been a top team that we're expecting to win the Premier League and whatnot. When you look at the results this year, I mean, they've lost. You mentioned briefly their home form. They lost at home to Tottenham 6-1. They tied Chelsea at home. They tied City at home. They lost to Arsenal at home, and then they've been knocked out of the Champions League. I don't know if those are the kind of results that you want from Man U to justify them, being or performing at a level that you'd expect, both as a fan and just as a Premier League, follower.
Yeah, I'd say to Man U fans, wake up. It's 2020, right? I mean, the Galactico model, which is what made them so successful in the past, doesn't work anymore, right? You need the big dollar players, but you also need the system and you need the coach. And that I just think that if you're the incumbent and you're making so much money hand over fist, you're never going to get any innovation. You're just going to try to preserve the status quo, right? They're just in wealth protection. They're not in wealth creation mode right now. And that's where Man U is until they decide to get a serious coach in, and then basically a major reshuffle that fits a system where they have patterns of play. Those decisions are too hard. Man United has not demonstrated an ability in which to make difficult decisions. I mean, that's why Pogba's still around, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see where Man U is, because I think the next 4 games, as to your point, Trey, they're out of Champions League. If they drop a majority of those 4 games, then maybe the senior brass are going to have to make some harder decisions. But for now, I think if they do 2 out of 2 or draw 1, lose 1, win 2, it's going to be fine. The boat's going to just keep moving. Speaking of underperformance, why don't we turn to Chelsea, which I think it was absolutely fascinating. About 8 or 10 days ago, there was this universal chorus from pundits that Chelsea is the rightful competitor to Liverpool and Man City. And then lo and behold, what do? They get beat by Everton, and then they get beat by Wolves. So, Harshal, what's happened where is Chelsea right now?
Chelsea and Man United, to be honest, are in very similar places, because they both have somewhat inexperienced managers, both former players, legends, and all of that, who basically got the job because they're club legends. I mean, there's no way Frank Lampard would have got a job at Chelsea with just a year at Derby County if he wasn't also arguably their greatest player ever, right? So the questions around Lampard are always gonna, they're never gonna go away unless he maybe wins a title or does something of that sort of or has that sort of achievement in the game. But with regard to Chelsea this season, they've managed to tighten up defensively to an extent, which was a problem last year. They conceded 54 goals in the league last year, but that has led to the attacking side coming unstuck, because, and again, injuries have played a part. They didn't have Kai Havertz for a bit because he was out with a severe bout of COVID. Callum Hudson-Odoi has been injured, came back, I think played a couple of games, got injured again. Pulisic has been, again, very inconsistent in terms of his fitness record. He's played a few games, been injured, in and out of the team. Hakim Ziyech, who was obviously a new arrival and was injured at the start, came in, did really well, but again has gotten injured. So they've struggled, especially in the attacking areas with injuries, and that's one area of the pitch where I think you need to play a lot. Like if you want to build partnerships and you want to build an understanding, you need to play together a lot more. And they've not managed to do that. And also because of that, they've had to play players out of position. Like you're seeing Timo Werner being played on the left, but he's playing as a winger. He's not playing as a forward. That's like Timo Werner was brilliant at RB Leipzig as a sort of hybrid, in a sort of hybrid inside forward role where he would play off the left, but not as a winger. He would sort of look to come inside and play off the central striker. But that's not what he's doing for Lampard at the moment. He's playing as an out and out winger. And I mean, if you look at the stats of the last two games, I think he had one shot on target over the last two games, both of which Chelsea have lost. They've been forced to play Kai Havertz out on the right because they don't have a right winger at the moment. Hudson-Odoi is injured, and Ziyech is injured. Pulisic also has been, as I said, hit and miss with his fitness. So there is, again, with other managers that we spoke about earlier, Lampard also, there is mitigation with regard to injuries. But when he has had everyone fit, even during those times, it hasn't looked like he knows what his best team is. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's to be expected with the team in the sort of stage of evolution as they are, as Chelsea are, which is that they've bought a bunch of new players. They're all getting to know each other. They have a relatively inexperienced manager as well. So they will be inconsistent. So I don't think anybody can say that they're going to be title challengers this year, even though, again, because it's going to be an inconsistent and a messy season, they could make a run for the title if other teams give up points as well. But top four, obviously minimum requirement, and I think they will get it because individual quality of the players is there, similar to Man United. But yeah, they're going to be inconsistent. I don't expect Chelsea to put together a run of form and go towards the top of the table.
Trey?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously a little bit shocked by the two losses they hadn't lost since they played Liverpool earlier in the season, and to lose to Everton and Wolves, I wouldn't have expected that. I wouldn't have put money on that. But yeah, I think it's interesting to me that the attack is what they spent so much on, and they have so many different players in the attack, and they're kind of struggling to put it all together. Not really sure why that may be the case. I mean, obviously Harshal mentions injuries, but we understand that injuries are a part of the game and everyone kind of goes through them. So I'm not sure. Hopefully, they can sort out. I guess maybe it's a tactical thing and figure out better ways to attack teams and get better overloads in better areas to create more chances and finish. But other than that, I mean, defensively, I think they've looked pretty solid, obviously, other than the last couple of games where they've conceded. So yeah, I think they just sort the attack out and I think they'll be fine.
So here's my quick take. I actually think their attacks, the irony is they spent all this money on attacking, and now the bright spot is someone that's been sitting on the bench for 2 or 3 seasons, right? And here's my every podcast shout out to Giroud. But they've scored 26 goals, which puts them second only to Liverpool's 29 in terms of goals scored. You also look at the number of goals they've had scored against them, which is 14, which ties them for 3rd or 4th lowest in the league. So from a goals for and against, they're taking care of business. I do think there's a little bit of unluckiness to this. I know that everyone's expectations are so high because they have so much amazing talent. So yes, they're underperforming that, but I think they're underperforming their position in the league table and some of the matches, I think because they're a little bit unlucky. So I'm not ready to, I wasn't one of the pundits thinking they're going to contend, but I don't think that they're going to be completely out of it too. I think they're going to be nipping. And I don't feel that that's too controversial, but I think the diagnosis is, it's just the expectations are so high given where Chelsea is, and it's probably was going to be impossible to match those expectations given the Galactico type nature that they have. So, speaking of Galacticos, but with a system, what about Man City, Harshal? What can we say about them now?
We're talking about teams potentially, as you said, Chelsea maybe not living up to expectations, but those expectations probably were too high to begin with. But City, I think, are one example of a team who are definitely not living up to expectations. I do not expect to see this from a Pep Guardiola side, for example, where we've spoken on the podcast as well about how it's also going to be a battle between pragmatism and dogma this season because of the nature of the season, the short preseason, COVID, injuries, fixture pileups, all of that. And I would not have expected to see Pep Guardiola be one of the guys who switches over to pragmatism as opposed to, playing his style and playing his way. Because look at the Man United game on the weekend, for example. City barely created any chances. Yes, there was that one-on-one chance that Riyad Mahrez missed, but that was, I think, the only big chance that they created throughout the game. And if you look at the game, Fernandinho and Rodri, the two defensive midfielders, were almost always sitting back in the to stave off the danger of a United counter-attack, along with the two centre-backs and usually one full-back. So that's 5 players who City have sitting back in their own half. Sometimes even 6 if the other fullback is sitting back. And I don't expect to see that sort of defensive pragmatism from Pep. I do get it to an extent because City have had their struggles defensively. And Fernandinho is not the player he once was. He's 35 now. He was, say, 5 years ago, even just, 5 years ago, he was brilliant, one of the best in Europe at playing as a single pivot in a 4-3-3. And that allowed David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne to go ahead and create and cause overloads because he was able to snuff out counterattacks. He doesn't have the legs for that anymore, and he's also had to be played at centre back. So they brought in Rodri last summer for a club record deal, and he's not good enough in terms of shutting down attacks. And that's not I'm not criticizing him. He's just a different kind of player. He's very good on the ball, but he's still not been able to master his positioning in terms of where he needs to be during which phase of play in terms of Pep's system, which is why they've been caught out on the counter-attack so many times. Their pressing has been extremely, it's a huge drop-off. If you look at PPDA numbers, which is basically passes per defensive action, which is a statistic which tells you how aggressively a team are making, are pressing opponents. City's City's PPDA last season was 10.19, which put them at 7th in the league, which is, you wouldn't think that that's too high. But this season, if you look at their pressing numbers, they're at 12.38, which is almost a 20% drop off in that sense. Even though they're 8th, in terms of the league, they're in the same, more or less the same spot because everybody is pressing less this season because it's a much more physically intense season. So you can't keep up your work rate. But City's press has dropped off. They're not creating chances as much as they were last season. I think they're struggling with width, for example, and I've spoken about this earlier as well. If you're playing Sterling on the left, you need a natural fullback on the left then to provide width. If you're going to play Cancelo on the left along with Sterling, both of them coming inside, there's no space out. There's nobody taking advantage of the space outside and you're just clogging up the center. So it's I don't know. Pep obviously has the tools at his disposal and he's one of the best managers in the world. So he should be able to turn this around. But there's too much going wrong in terms of the tactics and the personnel because there's a lot. Also there's too much of a reliance on Kevin De Bruyne as well, creatively. It looks like he's the only guy who's being able to create any chances. Sterling's not creating chances. Whoever's playing on the right, whether it's Foden, although actually Foden hasn't really played that much. I'd like to see him play a little bit more. But Mahrez isn't playing that much. Bernardo Silva has had an off season as he did last season as well. So I don't know. City, I've been personally very disappointed with them.
So here's my take on Man City. In terms of defensively, they're tied for the fewest goals allowed, along with Tottenham. So I think that part of the equation's in pretty good shape. If you look at the scoring side of it, Liverpool's got 29 goals and Tottenham's got 25, and Man City's got 18. And you're just not going to win the league with that anemic performance. And if you look at the top six, and to Pep's credit, there's some decent rotation there. Mahrez has got 6.19 successful attacking actions per 90. Foden comes in at 5.74 at number 2, even though he hasn't played a whole lot. KDB is in the middle at 5.7. The bottom, you've got Sterling at 3.85 and Jesus at 3.19. Now, Jesus is a striker, so you don't expect him to have a lot of, quote, successful attacking actions, but you do expect him to have more goals than 2. And Raheem Sterling at 3. And Aguero was that person that did the heavy lift. And one would expect a Sterling or a Jesus to step up. But between the two of them, they've only got 5 goals. And that's an issue. And Torres, who was supposed to be younger, he's got 1 goal. You would have, maybe that could have been a surprise, but it really hasn't happened. So I think the jury's still out on the offensive piece once Aguero comes back in. Trey, what's your take on Man City?
Well, 2 things. I mean, I think, we mentioned Aguero a lot, and Harshal will argue that, he's not the one creating chances, which I agree with, but Aguero commands more respect than Gabriel Jesus will command. So he'll occupy center backs more. He'll have teams focused on him a little bit more, which I think opens up more space in between the lines for the City players to operate. But, to that point, secondly, I'll mention David Silva. I've said it before. I think they've really struggled to find a replacement for him. In the past, it's been, like Harshal mentioned, Fernandinho, and then in front of him will be David Silva and De Bruyne. Now it's more of Fernandinho and Rodri and De Bruyne in front. And they've just relied on him by himself to kind of try to create the chances. And it's a big change for them. When you lose a player like David Silva, you're gonna struggle. And I mean, I would argue he's irreplaceable, but you're gonna have to figure out a way to balance out losing what he was giving you.
Can I make a quick side note on that?
Yeah,
I watched the Barca Real Sociedad game. David Silva is not having any trouble creating still. I mean, talk about
he won't.
It was open play versus open play. I mean, it was amazing. So I just want to give a shout out to your point. David Silva is just, where's that creativity going to come from? Realizing that KDB it needs some help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. In his time in the Premier League, I think him and Ozil were always at the top in terms of creating chances and assist numbers and whatnot. So that's a huge hole that they have to fill. And like Harshal said, Pep is he's an experienced manager. He's been in situations before where he needs to change things and figure something out. So I'm sure he will eventually, but time is running.
Speaking of holes to fill and coaches for Man City, let's turn our attention towards Arsenal. Trey, I got you on mic. We know you're a big fan. Give us your take on things.
I'll be completely honest. I'm lost. I'm very lost at the moment. We've spoken it to death. The lack of creativity. We're now seeing a lot of frustration in the players, obviously, with the red cards that they're starting to pick up. Just stupid red cards. I think the game against Southampton, obviously they went down and I think they were starting to grow into the game a little bit. They got the equalizer, and then unfortunately they go down to man, and they're happy to escape with a point against Southampton, which you would have never imagined in the previous years, especially at home. So it's been a tough road. It's going to continue to be a tough road. I think January is coming up, so they're hopefully going to look to bring in a couple players to change the tide a little bit and kind of, put a positive spin on things. But I don't know.
Harshal, what's your prognosis?
Just a couple of numbers first to put things into perspective. I mean, Arsenal have had the most number of red cards in the last 12 months of any team in the Premier League, and it's not even close. Arsenal have seen 7 red cards since Arteta took over. The team that's second in that list has 3. So, and they've obviously had 3 red cards in the last 5 games. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe Jay, later on, if you could help in terms of, does that, the frustration of not doing well and not playing well week on week when you're losing games, can that boil over onto the pitch in terms of the stuff that we've seen? Because as you said, they've been silly red cards. They've not been sort of, I can understand if you're frustrated or you want to make an impact on the game, that you go in hard in a challenge and maybe, make a forceful challenge or which gets you sent off. But these have been silly ones where Pepe sort of put his head on a player. Xhaka's grabbing someone by the throat. These sort of things are a little bit difficult to understand. Other than that, Arsenal had obviously lost 4 home games in a row. They were in danger of losing their 5th, but they managed to pull a draw out of the bag against Southampton. I think it's good that Aubameyang finally scored from open play as well. It was a really good finish, I think, from outside the box, curling it into the far corner. And hopefully this goal will give him the confidence now to go on a bit of goal scoring run. But that might not happen if they don't sort the creativity bit out. And we've spoken about it earlier. I mean, as Dre said, we've done it to death in terms of Arsenal's struggles for creativity, And one statistic I just want to bring up in that sense is the number of passes per shot that Arsenal have taken, which is quite simply total number of shots divided by total number of passes that Arsenal have. The other way around: total number of passes divided by total number of shots. And it's a decent way to tell both how many shots you're taking or how many basically whether you're taking enough shots in a way. So Arsenal this season have been making 51, nearly 52 passes for every shot that they've taken in the league, which is the highest by far. I mean, I think the next highest on that metric is Everton with 42. But so, I mean, they've had a lot of possession, but they don't have the creativity, or they're not making that final pass to players in dangerous areas, where who can then take a shot on goal. So, and obviously we've spoken about their defensive issues as well. So it's a case of everything, sort of, I wouldn't say everything, but a lot of things not working at the moment. And from an Arsenal fan perspective, I would want Arteta, if I was an Arsenal fan, to play some of the kids who he's been playing league and they've done well. So the likes of Emil Smith-Rowe, maybe start Ainsley Maitland-Niles more. Saka is obviously one of the leading lights of that team at the moment, but he's only 19, right? So Saka, Maitland-Niles, give Smith-Rowe some games. Maybe even follow in Balogun, who's another young striker they have, who's done decently well in the Europa League. So Eddie Nketiah, he played against Southampton, and I think he did well. So instead of Lacazette, maybe play Nketiah. So they maybe need to bring in some of the younger guys, because the experienced guys aren't helping them. Xhaka was captain of Arsenal at one point, and he was the guy who got sent off a couple of games ago. Pepe, brought in for 72 million over the summer, got sent off against Leeds, and I don't think he's really done too much from an attacking perspective. Willian has been a huge disappointment. Another experienced player brought in. I mean, obviously brought in on a free transfer, but he's being paid a huge amount of wages per week. He's not really done too much. So maybe as an Arsenal fan, I'd say, if I was an Arsenal fan, I'd say play the kids, I think. But that might maybe help them change things around a little bit.
I would amend that: play the kids and then play Ozil in January when he becomes eligible. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because for whatever reason, which is not logic, he's not playing. But the way I'd unpack Arsenal is they've allowed 16 goals, which puts them kind of 4th or 5th in terms of defensively. They've scored 14 goals. which puts them around 15th in the table. 15th, which is about where they are in the table. So that number, to me, those numbers indicate that, wow, defensively, guess what? Luis, who I wasn't a big fan of, he was a very calming influence in that Southampton game. I was very impressed with how the backbone stiffened and really did well. Rob Holding has also had an amazing season. And quite honestly, I didn't even know if he was a Premier League quality, and that's shame on me. I should have known more about him, but he's just done so well. So shout out to him. Offensively, you've nailed it. The number of successful attacking opportunities are de minimis with Pepe, Aubameyang, Willian, and Lacazette. So let's bring in the youngsters. Let's play that feel-good story about Arsenal Academy, which that narrative worked so well with Chelsea, and give Aubameyang a little bit of time to get his mojo back, and see where things go. So I kind of see where that's where Arsenal is. They are going to have some real work in terms of the matches that are coming up. They're going to have to play Everton, and then they're going to play Man City in the EFL Cup. They've got Chelsea. So those next three games, that's a lot of work. And they're going to have Brighton and West Brom, which at this point, there's no easy out for Arsenal. I do want to spend a couple minutes as we start to wrap up the podcast. Can we talk about the telenovela of the Premier League, which is Leeds? They are just so compelling to watch, and you get hooked on them, and you don't know where everything's going to go, right? Harshal, help me put Leeds in context.
We've done this to death as well in terms of that Leeds are definitely going to be the most entertaining team to watch in the league this season, and that's been the case so far. They did go on a bit of a slump. They lost their last three games before the game against Newcastle. They lost to Everton. Sorry, not the last three games, the last two games. They beat Everton 1-0, but then they lost to Chelsea and West Ham. And there was a lot of talk going on that Leeds are finally sort of, being pegged back to where they should be. They're going to struggle. They're falling off in terms of physical output, which I find ridiculous. That, a Bielsa team is not going to fall off physically. They're definitely always going to be one of the fittest teams in the league. And that literally proved to be the case in the game against Newcastle, because they scored 3 goals in the last 20 minutes of the game. And you could see the physical difference in terms of the Newcastle players were literally left in the wake of the Leeds players on all of those attacks and counter-attacks that Leeds made. And obviously there's mitigation to this to some extent in the sense that Newcastle are just coming out of a massive COVID outbreak. A number of players who had tested positive and obviously have now recovered, but still have those lingering effects were playing. But the narrative that Leeds were sort of, physically caught out, for example, that was doing the rounds after the West Ham game, was absolutely ridiculous. I think Leeds ran the most they have this season in the game against Newcastle, and in general, and this is actually a thing that Bielsa has spoken of earlier as well, that the one of the ways in which he equalizes the difference between his Leeds side and, say, a better team is by running more. And those stats bear it out. If you look at Leeds' running stats over the last couple of seasons that Bielsa has been in charge, they regularly run, on average per player, they run about 11 or 12 kilometers more than the other team, which equates to you having an extra player. A player is probably going to run anywhere between 10 to 13 kilometers per game. And if you as a team are running 13 kilometers a game more than the other team, that's effectively having an extra player on the pitch. So that physical output and the physical intensity that they bring is key to the way Leeds play, and that we saw that in the game against Newcastle. And I think Sunday's game against United could be one of the most watch. It's a must watch, because both these teams are brilliant when they attack at pace, and it could just be an end-to-end affair with attacks, going one way and the other, because Leeds are not going to sit back. And if Leeds are not going to sit back, they're going to leave space for United to counter into. So that's definitely going to be the game to watch this weekend. But on a general level, yes, Leeds do have the highest XGA in terms of expected goals conceded. They've also conceded, I think, if I'm not wrong, they've conceded third most goals in the league. They have the highest XGA, but at the same time, they've scored 22 goals, which is more than a lot of top teams have, right? They've scored more goals, for example, than Man City. They've scored more goals than Arsenal. So, yeah, you're going to get that. You're going to get games with a lot of goals either way for Leeds in Leeds games throughout the season. And I think they're going to continue to be one of the best teams to watch in the league.
They're going to have some stern tests with Man United. Then they've got some respite with Burnley, West Brom, and then they play Tottenham on January 2nd. Dre, any thoughts on Leeds?
No, I think Harshal summed it up. I mean, just they're an exciting team to watch. They're a fun team to watch. I'll use the word inconsistent again, but not in terms of performance, just in terms of results, because you never really know how their games are going to go. But yeah, they're really exciting to watch, really fun to watch, and I hope they beat Man U in a couple of days.
Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this pod. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, a 300-page guide of the season created by a team of 15-plus writers and designers. Moneyball for football, analytics plus opposition analysis plus eye candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Join us on our next Football Thinking Fan podcast. For now, bella ciao, ciao, ciao.